and welcome to Committee of the Whole for August 8th. And I guess we have most of Council here in the chamber tonight. Councillor Duncan isn't available tonight. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'll begin by acknowledging that we're meeting today, and in fact the entire town of Sydney is within the Wasanich traditional territory. I'd also like to mention that we recently heard the sad news that Pocatchin Chief Alan Tom passed away a few days ago. We extend our condolences to his family, the community, and the Wasanich people. So moving on then to the approval of the agenda, we have a late item, which is some correspondence relating to 7A2, sorry, 7A, and we'll make that, we'll add that under item 7A as 7A2 right before the public participation period. Also, item 7C relates to direction that was made by council at the previous meeting, and since it involves potentially reconsidering direction made by council, it shouldn't be handled at Committee of the Whole. It should in fact be handled at council. So in bringing forward the agenda tonight, I'd be looking for someone to propose an amendment to remove that from the agenda. So with that, would someone like to move the agenda as amended?
Thank you, Chair. I'll move the agenda as amended with those additions of correspondence and the removal of item 7C.
Second.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So then we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the public participation period, which is a maximum of 20 minutes. If anyone would like to come forward to address committee, please step up to the podium and use the microphone. And you've got approximately 4 minutes. And seeing no one, yes?
Pardon my unaware of all this works. Do you wait for the one you're wanting to talk about to be done and then the following minutes after?
Yes, actually you can speak twice. You can talk about it now and you can talk about it later if you'd like, or you can simply wait till later. So go ahead. If you could press the button to turn on the red light and give us your name and address.
So I'm Stephen Bailey. I reside at 9477 Maryland, and I work and own the automotive shop at 98 25th Street, where the neighboring building is looking to have some setbacks and other allowances coming up. And I just wanted to voice some of my concerns with the development moving forward. I see he's trying to have the addition of a dwelling installed. Now, I wasn't aware that the zoning of the property allowed a dwelling, and I am an automotive shop that is running 7 days a week, so I do have some concern of being in the same building, having people housed for health and safety could be an issue. Noise is going to be an issue, as I am working till 7, 8 o'clock at night. Like I say, I'm there 7 days a week as an owner-operator. Weekends is, could be extended repair. It could be building maintenance on my side, which will be a frequent noise annoyance to the possible tenants. Parking is also going to be an issue. With him moving the setback forward and deleting the one space to get more floor space, it looks beautiful on the floor plan, but as you are aware, downtown Sydney and the surrounding 2 blocks is congested for parking. I did see in the application there, assuming that there will be no overlap between the commercial operation and the people housing there. I just find it hard to believe, being a lot of people do work remotely, shift workers, etc. So I just wanted to start by making sure my voice is heard with my concerns of the damage this could cause to the operation of my business, deleting parking and including a dwelling in the same building that was never really designed to be a dwelling building. It's an empty commercial hull. I'm sure it can be engineered on that side to be safe and sound. My only concern is I have equipment anchored to the same foundation, and as I'm working with that equipment, those vibrations will be felt throughout the building, no matter what they do. And I'm sure that down the road you will hear multiple complaints from people living there, causing some headaches for my long-term lease and possibly to my business. that's where I'm going to leave it for now until I hear the rest of their presentation to see where it's actually going. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else that wishes to address committee during public participation? Okay, I'll ask for a second time and a third and final time. And hearing none, I'll close public participation. With respect to the particular item that you were speaking to, the proponents will be giving a presentation in a bit. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. Staff have also got a report. They've heard your questions. They may comment on some of the stuff as well. And the process does not finish tonight. If a committee sees merit in it moving forward, the recommendation goes to council at the next meeting, and then, depending on what the recommendation is, goes forward from there. But the variance application as a minimum has to be advertised. Okay, so having said that, we'll move on to item 7A, which is development permit application number DP 100837. And
Sorry, Chair, we need 5A first.
Sorry, thank you. We have the minutes of the Committee of the Whole from July 11th, and you have those in front of you. Would someone like to move adoption?
I'll move that they be approved.
Second?
Okay, that's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, now moving on to 7A, development permit application DP 100837, development variance application number DV 100322, 9824 5th Street to relax maximum front setback, minimum number of parking spaces, and EV charging requirements in order to allow additional floor area and renovations, including the addition of a dwelling unit to the existing building. So does staff want to introduce this, or
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, if I might.
go ahead?
So this proposal is for the renovation in addition to the existing building on site, which, as was noted previously, is essentially an empty shell at this point. It's half of a commercial duplex located on 5th Street. The proposal is to add a residential unit and convert the commercial space on the ground floor to a veterinary office. That includes an addition floor space on the first and second stories for both the residential unit and the commercial space. There are some variances associated with this application. The first is for the front setback. The zoning bylaw in this zone requires both a minimum and a maximum front setback. The building was built in the late 1980s, far behind the maximum setback. So they're adding floor space to the front of the building behind that setback. There are 2 parking variances. One is to vary the overall parking requirement by 2 spaces from what's required on site to 2 below that. And there's also 1 variance for reducing the number of accessible parking spaces on site. Currently, they're proposing a Type A accessible space. A Type B accessible space is also required, but given the overall number of parking spaces on the site, they are requesting a variance for that. I should bring up 2 errors in the staff report. There's a variance noted for electric vehicle charging. That's an error. There should not be a variance for that. Electric vehicle charging is only required where there's 3 or more units in a building that are residential uses. And then one variance that's not noted is where a residential use, a dwelling unit, is on the same floor as a non-residential use. In this case, there's some office and storage space. A variance would be required for that. A condition of use is that the residential and non-residential uses not be on the same floor. So just to note that. Apart from those variances, the proposal is largely in conformance with the objectives and policies in the OCP, the zoning bylaw, the parking bylaw. It's a a building that was built for a very different purpose several decades ago, and staff are generally in support. It's a good adaptive reuse of an existing structure. Thank you.
Okay. So now we have a presentation by Sylvia Bonet, and the floor is yours. If you could press the microphone, please.
Good evening, and thank you very much. This is the first time actually that I am in the flesh. I'm in front of a council meeting, so interesting steps. So thank you so much for looking into this application. As mentioned before, this is an existing building that, as it stands, has been actually empty for a amount of years. I mean, so we know that the Star Cinema had its home for a few months there, or a year plus, but otherwise it's a building that most of the time has remained empty or with very underused space. So finally, there is somebody in the community interested on revitalizing the building, using it for their own business, and actually adding a residential unit, a rental unit that definitely is a plus into the community. So as we know, we try to promote the mixed use of all the streets. I mean, so to have the combination of commercial and residential. Every time that we have only a commercial use, I mean, so we run into the problem that after hours, that building is empty. So there is no life given to the street, that there is no interaction, I mean, with anything happening in the street. So we have the positive that instead of being demolished, or what it would be difficult because, I mean, it's part of a duplex, but or abandoned. So we have a building that has been, as I said, I mean, misused or underused, actually, rather than misused. Underused, and now there is the possibility of having it coming back to life and renovate it, bring it up to current standards, have a business that is part of the community, and add a rental unit. The rental unit, the purpose of that is hopefully, I mean, for the owner to increase, I mean, the amount of workforce housing and rental units that are in the community, but also that if somebody is working at the pet hospital, I mean, and doesn't have a place where to live, I mean, so they will get the priority to live in that space. So regarding the setbacks and the variances required, as a planner, as Corey Newcomer has mentioned, so this building is prior to the existing zoning in the C1. And as such, I mean, so we deal with buildings that were already outside what it's today required as a commercial building setback. Added to that is that if we were to bring the building to the front of the building as required in current zoning, so then we would have no room for parking whatsoever. That will be reduced to zero. And if we were to have the absolutely wonderful opportunity to have a driveway going into the back of the building to have the parking, so then we wouldn't have a business. So given the size of the property, I mean, that is rather small, so it becomes quite difficult and to do anything else than what we're doing. So restoring the existing building, add a small amount of square footage into the existing, have the parking as it was originally, and it has been in that configuration for a long time, add in a handicap parking stall and having 2 additional parking stalls. The variance for only 1 accessible parking stall rather than 2 is that actually by building code, the minimum number of units, the minimum number of parking stalls that are required to have accessible parking stalls are 50. So in this case, we are only on 3, and I understand this is part of the Sign Bylaws, but this is a business in which most likely people come into the business, so will be fully able bodies, and somebody that can't park in accessible spot if it doesn't display the proper deco. So by putting 2 accessible parking stalls, we are actually depriving the community to really and fully using what most likely will be heavily used, so to come to the site. This is not a site that is going to have a tremendous amount of people coming to the place, and in that sense, having 1 handicap, so it covers that requirement, having 1 unit for the residential, and probably that's most likely going to happen in off work hours, and having really 2 spots that are for the people coming to the pet hospital. So I think, yes, aside from actually eliminating the building altogether, so it's very challenging, to find other solutions. Regarding the comments that were made before about the sound that could happen, in the building, I know that the Star Cinema had its operation for a year plus or more, probably. Here, Margie Shendak may remember more accurately how long it was there. 2 years, thank you. The reality is that they were never concerned about the sound. And that was exactly on the same level. So, and we have the residential unit is actually at the front of the building. So, I imagine that the sound, and we will address in any case, the sound barriers between the 2 buildings. That's part of the building code that needs to be properly addressed. So I think that's in a nutshell what I wanted to mention about the setback variance and the parking variance and the handicap parking variance. If there is any, I'm sorry. And regarding the use of the office, as Corey just mentioned, and this was added just now, that office is for the use of the pet hospital. So it's not for rent, it's not a lease, it's the same owner downstairs that will have that space upstairs. Originally, this proposal was for 2 residential units. The fact that we have an industrial facility next door is not, from the code perspective, that is a non-permitted use, so it's only permitted to have 1 residential unit. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So are there any questions from committee for the proponent or for staff? And starting with Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just the last comment you made about the reason you switched from 2 residential units to 1 was because of the neighboring industrial?
No.
Sorry.
No, because of the building code. The building code, the provincial building code directs what are the uses permitted. And the industrial use next door is what is called an F2. So, and because this is 1 building, it's a strata title, but it's 1 building,
okay.
You're not allowed to have more, so you can have commercial uses, but you're not allowed to have more than 1 residential unit.
Okay, right, got you. The unit upstairs, so you've identified that it's an adaptable unit. Were you doing that just because you thought it was a good thing, or because you thought it was a requirement?
It's a good idea. It's a good idea to do it. It's not but the access to the unit, it will have to be through a stair lift. So, but it's a possibility.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've since identified that there is not a requirement for an adaptable.
No, that's
unit.
correct.
So I was just curious as to whether you were doing that because you thought you had to. Or
We normally do a lot of the units and things. So with some elements of adaptability, not everything, but so the adaptable has the advantage that it provides some flexibility in the use, especially in the bathrooms. Not so much in the rest of the unit, but to have additional space in the bathrooms.
Right. Okay. And I guess what I'm wondering is the veterinarian that's going to occupy the space presumably he's aware that there's an automotive business.
Oh,
that
of course he
operates.
is.
And I guess, I know, when I've had pets, they can get very aggravated and anxious with loud noise and banging and that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, do you anticipate that pets would be staying overnight in this facility, and what sort of impacts it might be on people's animals if they're listening to?
They do have the possibility to stay overnight. I mean, so and in case of surgeries and some treatments. The wall between the two units is part of that is concrete block wall. So so we will have to add a fairing wall on the interior of the pet hospital, and the same for the upper floor. That new wall will have the insulation required for sound transmission, so we can achieve, and also the room where the pets stay overnight, that can also be insulated. I mean, and soundproofed. The reality is that. In an apartment building, somebody talking loud in the corridor can be a deterrent. I mean, to a pet that is sensible to sound.
Right, okay. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got Councillor Rintoul, then Councillor Garna.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the clarification that it's a strata, so we've got two separate owners here, and I take it like most stratas, there's a number of sort of strata bylaws, and perhaps, if not yourself, but the earlier presenter, maybe able to comment to reassure us that what's being requested is in keeping with the existing strata bylaws. It would be a piece of interest, certainly with respect to the residential unit. My question for you is around, it appears that the automotive repair shop is recessed slightly, fairly significantly. So comparing it to the residential unit and the drawing that you provided, whereabouts does the wall from the repair shop align to that residential unit? Is it somewhere around the bathroom on that wall?
So, yeah, we have it's kind of a halfway, so I'm not sure if you can see that. That's the residential, so this is
Yep.
the length of this, so we're kind of halfway, so we have one bedroom and the bathroom there. So, but this is in line with the wall at the front. So, this is a side plan, you can see, that's lining up here.
Right, but I take it the shop is behind that small entrance area. Again, perhaps the previous speaker will comment on that.
Yeah,
But it would appear as if the shop itself is somewhat recessed from the residential unit,
it is a little bit recessed, yeah.
but not significantly then.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Garna.
Thank you, Chair. My question's through to staff. Just want to wrap my head around the whole parking thing because it's kind of all over the map for me. So please inform me if I'm correct or incorrect in my assumptions here. It should have had 6 spaces when it was originally designed, was allowed to have 4. They're now required to have 8, but they're only providing 3.
Through the chair to Councillor Garnett, the parking explanation is somewhat complicated. So when the structure was originally built in the late 80s, at the time, I don't know what the exact number is, but at the time, the overall building, this would include the muffler space next door, met its parking requirement.
Okay.
Again, I'm not sure what that exact number is. So it was built legally with the required number of parking spaces. So we consider it legally non-conforming. Doesn't
Right.
meet the current bylaw standards. There's also so the current bylaw standards would be 7 spaces. However, there's a clause in the parking bylaw that basically says whatever parking you're providing for the existing space now for that commercial use is all you need to provide. And the reason that's in there is because in most cases, there's nowhere else to provide additional parking. And if the parking requirement of a new commercial use going into that space is more than what the building and the land can provide, quite often the business just goes away and says, we can't open here. So to encourage businesses to locate in Sydney and to try to be flexible to them, the parking bylaw has that exemption. So that number is 3. In addition to those 3 spaces that are currently required, 1 additional space is required for the residential unit and 1 additional space is required for the addition to the commercial space. So our requirement is 5, they're providing 3, they're asking for a variance for 2. I hope that's clear.
Thank you.
Fairly
That's the excellent job. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. On the drawings for the second level, it shows the storage space. Will that be storage space for the commercial or the residential?
It hasn't been divided, but for both. For both. I mean, it hasn't been structured, the space inside, but mostly some of that can be allocated to the residential, and the rest, the majority, will be for the pet store.
Okay. The report shows or the plans show that the backyard, if you will, will be a grassy area, and we can see how that could be of benefit to the animals there. It's fairly large, 40 feet wide and 20 feet deep. What are the intended uses in that large area?
It's what the owner wants to, whether they can put some of the pets outside. I mean, for some time, I don't have direct information on if that's some kind of therapy with the dogs. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. My last question is, the report starts off, the staff report starts off saying this is an existing 2-story building featuring ground floor commercial. It's really a 1-story building with a mezzanine of many hundreds of square feet. But it is going to go to a complete 2-story building, that is with an entire second floor. To do that kind of renovation, which is how this is described in the report, does it require replacing the entire front wall on the east side, the entire west wall, and the entire north wall to be able to put in a proper second story?
No, you can.
Second story floor.
No, it can be done. It can be done without a full replacement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. Question actually through to staff. In regards to the plans that for the office space, if we grant the variance for office space with the residential, and there's an office space up there, should the building be sold, is there a potential that the next owner could then turn around and rent out an office space on the second floor?
Through the chair to Councillor Fallett, yes, I think. Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so then we would have mixed use on the same floor, and,
Potentially,
okay,
that's a
Thank you.
possibility.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I did have one follow-up when I was speaking to the walls. So we did have a piece of correspondence as an item received during the agenda this evening, and the writer expressed some concern with regards to the north wall that faces the.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, your mic.
I'm sorry, I pressed it too many times. Sorry, just going back to my questions with regards to the wall. In particular, I have an additional question with regards to the north wall. We've had a piece of correspondence that expresses some concern if there are going to be changes to the north wall. Do you see any change with that wall as it faces the development to the north?
No, the intent is not to touch that wall. I mean, at least the facing north. I mean, the interior of the wall for sure, but not the
Great.
exterior.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Keith?
Thank you. A question through you to staff, and for the benefit of the automotive business owner, to clarify that even if we were to deny the parking variance, they still have the option which doesn't require our approval to pay in lieu. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, correct, provided that the percentage of parking spaces being paid for in lieu do not exceed the 20%, 25%,
So
20% required by the bylaw. I don't know exactly at this moment if those two spaces would exceed that number.
Okay, so, so even if, so to get to the automotive owners concerned about parking, one way or the other, there's probably gonna be a shortage of parking, even if, whether we like it or not, is my understanding.
By shortage, do you mean a shortage in relation to the bylaw requirements or a shortage in terms of people's perception of the parking provided on site?
The former.
Okay. I'll need to take a look at that.
Okay. Okay, and one other question, if I may, to Ms. Bonet. That area at the back, I haven't looked at the plan in that much detail. Is it conceivable that any of that could be used for parking, depending how
No.
you? No, okay.
No, absolutely not, because there is no access. There is
Oh,
no vehicle
right.
access to that
Okay.
to that area. It doesn't have the proper space, and that's what I meant. Okay, so here you are in the conundrum that you have a property that is fairly small, that has a small width, you know. So, and as you can see, I mean, the way the cars are parking, I mean, on an angle parking. So there is no room really for the drive aisle. So the options here are really, or the building doesn't, so it stays as sort of a business, but with a very awkward spaces, as the mayor has indicated. I mean, so there is part of that building that is a 2-story high with a mezzanine. It's not quite a mezzanine. It doesn't conform as such, but with a double height. You know, what is not really conducive also for the operation that they intend to use the building for. So it's one of those difficult situations. I think that the proposed plan that we have come up with is the best scenario, so that provides a housing for somebody that could be working at the pet hospital, or for anybody else, it's a rental unit, and the hospital operating as they would like to, yeah.
And I'm just trying to understand the parking there now, because there was mention about a parking space being lost due to the extension. So are there 4 parking spaces there now, or is there 3 and then you?
It's really the use of one of those spaces being a handicap parking that is wider. So that's why we don't have the 4, so we have only 3. So there is no room.
So currently there is 3?
There are three parking stalls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like there's a
No.
parking spot that's
No.
going to be lost due to, okay,
No.
I understood. Okay.
But there is more space required because the handicap parking
Yes.
spots requires more space.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
understood, thank you.
Further questions from committee? Yeah. Sorry. Mr. Newcomb?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the number of parking spaces required by the bylaw is the 3 spaces that are currently on site, plus 2 additional spaces. So a total of 5 spaces are required. 20% of that is 1 space. So they are able to pay in lieu for 1 of the spaces, but not 2.
So, I do have a question for staff. If the, regardless of the development permit and the variances that are coming forward, the building as is, if it was being built now, today, it would need, I think you said 7 parking spaces?
With the uses as proposed, I mean, the parking spaces depend on what the uses are inside the building,
Understood.
but with the uses as proposed, that's correct, 7.
I guess the point I was going to make is that for the last 2 years, it's been operating with less than the number of spaces that our bylaw says, and we haven't been getting complaints about a shortage of parking at that location. I'm just commenting.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, the number is 8. It's 7 for the commercial plus 1 for the residential.
Thank you. But my point remains the same. It's been operating for a couple of years like that without complaint. At any rate, that was all I wanted to raise. Are there any more questions for the presenter or staff? Okay, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Through the chair, back to Mr. Newcomb again. So, so they could only pay in lieu for one. So if council were to not provide a variance, and if they can't physically put in another space, so that means they can't build the building, or? So if that's, they can only opt for pay in lieu for 20%.
Correct.
Okay. So
I
they
mean,
would
there are
have-
other options. You know, they could potentially rethink the amount of commercial space or something like that to reduce the parking requirement.
Okay,
But as currently proposed, a variance is required for the proposed amount of floor space in residential unit.
okay, okay, thank you.
Okay. So, I think we've run out of questions for the presenter and staff. Thank you. And what's going to happen now, there is a recommendation to refer to ABC, but I'd like to have the public participation period following the presentation to provide the opportunity for anyone to ask questions of the presenter or make comments, if anyone would like to. Yep, please do. And please press the microphone.
And so yes, the parking is part of the concern, not the main focus. I think really it has 4 designated spots right now with a 5th kind of in front of the bay. To your point about complaints, how much was Sandy actually open during the pandemic and how many showings did she have? How many times did I have to go over there and get vehicles moved from my lot? And how many times did Andy have to get vehicles moved from his lot without you guys finding out? Quite often I know of 3 instances where I had a tow vehicle dump a vehicle off, blocking Sandy's patrons in. She had my contact. I was able to go and move the vehicles so that people could get out. So pertaining to you're not hearing complaints, you don't hear all the complaints. There are some issues with overflow parking, but my biggest concern, I guess, is more health and safety for residents living there, and I guess the animals to a degree. I don't think there's going to be a lot of animals staying there long term for any kind of exposure to excessive noise. Now, for one point that was made about no complaints for noise while Sandy was there, well, a lot of times the movie noise drowned us out, and I would have to stop trying to find a tick, a click, a rattle, a noise until a certain scene was over in the movie. I worked really well with Sandy. She was a great neighbor, but really in the amount of time, 2 years that she was there, what was she open? 4 months in total, concurrent? I mean, not much. And a lot of her stuff was done late at night while I'm finishing up and leaving. On weekends, I did try to work around a little bit of her showings, knowing she needed to survive. And her bubble parties worked really well. But my biggest concern, I guess, is I'm doing a fuel system repair. I've got a fuel tank open. I can't get that back in at night. Those fuel vapors are pouring through that building, and it is a hollow shell. I don't know how much vapor barriers between both sides. I'm sure a resident living there is going to be smelling fuel vapor throughout the night. That is going to become an issue. I store chemicals, brake clean, oil. I have stacks of tires on the property that I have to maintain for my pickup status. They won't pick them up unless I got 50 tires. I keep those out back and stored, but I also have to stack them out front. And I can only do that at night. And there's a lot of noise traipsing through the shop. Now, wall barrier's one thing, but my equipment's anchored to the foundation. My equipment makes noise. Foundations are foundations. My biggest concern is how are people going to be able to live in their quiet and comfort and security that they're supposed to get in a residence they're paying big dollar for because it looks like a 3-bedroom unit. It's not going to be $1,000 a month suite. How much am I going to suffer as a business? Secondly, strata property, shared costs. I share the insurance brunt. I'm a 60% footprint. Adding residential up there, what's that going to do to the property insurance requirements? It's going to penalize me as a shop owner while he reaps the benefit. I'm not against him having it. I want to make sure that I'm protected as a business owner and a member of the community. I've been there 16 years running that shop. I've worked on your wife's car. I've worked on Sylvia's car. I've worked on everybody's car at some point. I'm a coach with the local soccer league for the last 5 years, taking a year off. I've got kids in Peninsula skating. My wife works at Thrifty's. I need to stay here. It's very important my business keeps moving forward. My biggest concern is the detriments these will cause me as a business owner. That's my biggest concern. I just want to make sure I'm also being looked out for, not just densifying downtown Sydney a little bit more to increase it 3 bedrooms. It's going to add 1 family, right? So I just want to make it known that there are some separate issues than parking that do fall under more importance. Health and safety is the biggest one. Financial penalty to me, being the larger footprint holder. Those are my biggest concerns. So, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for bringing forward those comments. The architect for the proponent has heard everything you've said, and I'm sure is going to be considering that. But perhaps more importantly, our staff have heard it as well as our liaison to the APC, and I'm sure that we'll give full consideration to your concerns, and you will have some additional opportunities to, comment and provide input on this.
Sure.
So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, committee, do you have any final questions for anyone? Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you. Just to one of the speaker's points, and Councillor Rentoul alluded to the bylaws existing, with this duplex strata. That may cover some things. A question through you to staff is, in certain circumstances and developments, we will recommend covenants, give awareness of situations. Would this be an appropriate would that be an appropriate mechanism, or would we leave it to the strata bylaws?
Through the chair to the mayor, yes, it would be an appropriate mechanism. In this case, it could be required as a condition of a variance approval related to the residential unit. So for example, council allowing the residential unit to be located on the same floor as the office use. The concerns about that and potentially concerns about the noise next door, council could require a covenant in that case. I would say it's a little bit tricky in this case because as I understand it, the residential unit is intended to be a rental unit. Now, typically with the covenants, it's when someone purchases a property and that covenant is registered on title, they become aware of it, they read the covenant and understand that, hey, there might be something going on next door that could disturb my enjoyment of the property, and, fair warning at that point. With a rental building, or a rental unit, that same opportunity doesn't exist. However, covenants can also run with the land, meaning that as properties change over time, the covenant is still in place regardless. Because this is a strata, there's also a possibility for the strata to add units. For example, the residential unit could be divided off as a separate strata unit. So in that case, the covenant would then be on the title of the property and would ensure that if that residential unit was sold separately, the eventual owners would become aware of the issues surrounding the property.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rentoul, did I see your hand up?
No, Chair, but I was just hoping you'd call again for public participation. I wasn't sure if there was someone else that maybe wanted to comment. Beg your pardon.
Oh, thank you. So yes, is there anyone else that would like to comment? Yes. And please approach them. If you could turn the microphone on and give us your name and address.
Yeah, my name is Jack Gallup. Gallup is G-A-L-L-O-P. I reside in the condominium complex that's immediately north of this proposed construction. That's the Beaufort building at 9840 5th Street. Not generally against this proposal. We always knew this day would come. Our only concern is, first of all, the height of the building, and would it impact, if the height increases, would it impact our residents who live in the south side of our building access to sunlight? The second is parking, always an issue here, and we're concerned about increased parking on 5th Street, which also already impacts the quality of life and the safety in some respects of our residents. To say we always knew this day would come, given the development that's proposed, it was certainly the best available, the best option to us, so I certainly don't oppose it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to speak to this particular item? Okay, if not, I'll close the public participation then. So, committee, you've heard all the discussions. There's a recommendation to refer it to APC. Would someone like to make a motion? Councillor Rento?
Thank you. I'll move the development permit application number DP 1008337 and development variance permit application number DV 1000322 9824 5th Street be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
Is there a seconder?
Second for discussion.
Okay, seconded for discussion. So, for discussion, Councillor Rento?
Thank you, Chair. I think, I move the recommendation on the basis that, by our process, we should provide the opportunity for the Advisory Planning Commission to review this and provide their comment. I'll also note that, we learned this evening or late today of some of the changes with respect to the variances that are being requested, either deleted or added to this. So I think it provides the APC the opportunity to review this perhaps in that more fulsome context and then come back to council based on their suggestions and comments. I'll acknowledge to having some concerns based on insight today from the adjacent property owner, and I think that's very important with regard to the residential element that's being proposed here that is certainly worthy of some further concern and some consideration. In terms of the intended purpose, I think this is a building, as the last speaker noted, is probably long overdue to see some sort of redevelopment and some sort of improvement made, and that would be welcome. Whether or not it dovetails as nicely with the residential element, I think is probably where my concern lies. So I'll leave my comments there. Thank you, Chair.
Seconder, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll support the recommendation, but I do want to note that I have some really serious concerns around it. Councillor Fallett spoke to one of them. If the office space use changes in the future, it may not mesh with a residential unit. So, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but that's something that we have to kind of think about when we're looking at how allowing something like this to happen. I appreciate the gentleman speaking. These are issues I wouldn't even have thought of. And on top of the residential part of it, you have to think if there is animals staying overnight and there's vapors, and how negative an impact that would be on an animal as well, trying to recuperate from surgery or whatever have you. And I have real concerns around the parking. I just do, because it's one thing to take your animal for a wellness check. You can walk them there. But if they're sick or if they need immediate attention, you're taking them in your car. And the spaces will be necessary. And we can hope that the people who work in the vet clinic live in the unit and don't need a car, but we don't know that. And I don't want to think I'm adding more vehicles onto the street, because people are finding it three-bedroom unit could be 3 individuals, could be 3 cars. And the vet clinic, a lot of people in Sydney have pets and they're looking for vets, and it's quite possible that if they're successful, that 2 spots and an accessible spot may not be enough. The accessible spot will be important because of the demographic we have. People with mobility issues will need to take their car to take their animal to the vet. So these are all things that I have serious concerns around, but I will support the recommendation, and I do want to hear what APC has to say. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. I will support this proposal going forward to APC. I do hold some concerns and reservations. I'm just going to briefly touch on the parking, and I appreciate the neighboring strata owner bring forth his experiences. And a comment had been made that there hadn't been any issues with the previous tenant and parking. I would also add that previous tenant has never had parking on their own property and had relied on public parking. This is now adding an additional business and a residential unit, so we are effectively increasing the demand on the available parking, public parking to boot. So I think parking is going to be an issue.
As far as the use of the building, I do have some concerns of marrying these two businesses that have quite different needs, sharing a common wall that hasn't been from the ground up built to accommodate those separate uses. So I'm a little challenged of the welfare for the animals, feeling the vibrations and that. I know what animals, how they react when there's thunder and fireworks, so that is a concern for me. Adding the residential unit, and as I had questioned earlier regarding the use of the office space, and would it remain in-house as it were, or could it potentially at some point be another office, and are we then going to have concerns raised because we've got competing interests going on? So I think we have to tread very carefully with this one, and not that we don't own anything else, but especially careful because I think there's we're making some changes, potentially making some changes, and we need to consider this very, very carefully. I don't know if what we're being presented here is the best idea. I'm concerned, but I will look forward to hearing what APC has to say. Thank you.
Other members of committee? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I'm still waffling on whether I'm going to support it going to APC. I might. However, I also have a lot of concerns. So the parking, I think that's been covered off very well. I'm also concerned about, the pay in lieu for the parking. I could say right now that I likely wouldn't support that. I think back to when we amended the bylaw for pay in lieu, and we knew that we were going to get, people coming forward wanting to utilize this. So if we were to reject the variance and then allow them to do the pay in lieu, anyways, the parking is a concern. The other concern is the residential unit on the second floor. So it's not permitted by the bylaw, and I think there's good reason for that. Having mixed commercial and residential use, I don't know that that's a good idea. And I guess I have concern about also erosion of commercial space. So using that space for residential when it could be used for commercial. Also the concerns that the automotive owner expressed, I just don't know that this is a good fit. So I think I would be in favor of sending it to APC to see what they have to say, and to see if through our comments the applicant might sort of make some adjustments. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mayor McNeil-Smith? Oh, sorry, I see staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to highlight that a veterinary clinic is a permitted use on the property. So if this applicant just came to the town and said, I want to improve the interior of this space, bring it up to code for this use of veterinary clinic, they would be able to do that by right. So, regardless of the public's opinions or whoever's opinions on whether or not this is a proper use for this space, it's permitted by the bylaw, provided they can meet the building code requirements to improve the space to accommodate that use with fire separations and potentially odor separations. I'm not sure. They're able to do that. The same goes for residential units, provided that they meet the conditions of use for the residential units, which are that the unit not be on the same floor as a commercial unit. So those are permitted uses that the town can't prevent someone from doing, provided they're doing it in accordance with the bylaw and the building code. And in this case, the variances that are being requested do influence some of those things, but it's important to note that other things that are being proposed are by right in the zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the comments from colleagues. I will support this going to APC. I certainly want to hear their comments and recommendations on this. But I won't repeat all of the concerns that I share with colleagues, but try to speak to them, some of them briefly. And one is with regards to the mixed use on the second floor. We know that's a variance to our zoning bylaw to have a residence and a business on a second floor in the commercial district, and I think it's a good provision in the zoning bylaw because it overchanges to the nature of the commercial business over time operating adjacent to a residency. It can create challenges, I noted in the staff reports and some of the questions that council members forwarded to staff, and we received answers that at one time the proponent was considering having 2 residential suites above, and that's not permitted, as we heard this evening, because of the industrial use next door. And so to me it seems, since that second residential unit isn't required, a bit of an afterthought to use that space for commercial use. Did the clinic originally intend that, or do they actually need that space? Further to a question I asked this evening about the storage space, and I'm still terrible at converting meters to square meters to square feet, but it's a very large storage space upstairs, and it's going to be used by both the residents and the commercial. And we're just have a stairway, and it's going to be a fairly long stairway from as a walk up to the residential area and that commercial office and commercial storage area. And I'm just not sure I see those uses compatible. So I know APC committee will review all aspects, but that is one of my concerns. And I share the concerns that have been expressed in terms of the appropriateness of the residential use. It is a permitted use within our zoning, and there's a limitation on it, as we've come to understand this evening. And perhaps new construction could deal with the challenges that might be posed in a better way. But again, we would hope that the building code would and other codes would be able to deal with that. With regards to the parking, one of my concerns is the intensity of use. I mean, I meant to start off my remarks by saying I'm pleased to see that a greatly underused building for I think about 15 years since the Marine Chandlery closed there, which was a very very active business at the time when it was open. It has been a greatly underused commercial space, and it's nice to see that some creative ideas have come forward to repurpose and that to be very usable. And it seems to me, while not being intimate with vet clinics, although we've had to attend them, is it seems to be a pretty significant going concern. It has 4 exam rooms, a separate treatment area, a surgery room, and an imaging room, manager's office, doctor's office, lab area, multi-purpose area, reception area, the outdoor area. It has a building occupancy of 29. That's not to suggest 29 people are going to be there every day, but it's going to be an active location, both for employees working out of all of those different functional areas, and for the people coming and going, whether they're shorter visits or longer visits with their animals. So, it comes back. I certainly would support the variance to allow. I support the variance on the setback. I wouldn't want to suggest that that setback should be reduced. That would only increase the parking challenge. And in general, I would support the variance on the second accessible parking space. But in terms of there only being 3 functional parking spaces for something that intensive, in terms of the veterinary clinic, and in terms of the residential unit, if my conversion is correct, the unit upstairs is about 3,000 square feet or larger, 3 bedrooms. It could be 3 separate individuals living up there. That's not uncommon in downtown Sydney for employees getting together and living together. And but there is no remedy. Well, a colleague has spoken to whether we would be supportive of the parking variance. To deny the variance would mean the project would not go forward. So Is all of that use required up on the second floor? Do they have to build out that entire second floor? I think, you know, maybe some consideration should be given to that, as well as all the other considerations that APC committee and staff will give. Thank you.
So, before any second speakers, I'll throw in my 2 cents worth. And I'm gonna start off by saying, I value the business that's next door, the automotive business, and I wouldn't wanna see anything compromise that or cause problems. But, obviously, we've got some issues here to consider, and the compatibility between what's being described as an industrial use, F2, and the adjacent use, which is permitted under the zoning, is a challenge. And fortunately, the architects heard the full conversation and will have a chance to explore solutions, and I'm sure staff is going to do the same thing. But my sort of starting point in this is kind of thinking about the OCP and what we want to see happen in that area of downtown, and what is compatible with an operation next door like that. I mean, the kinds of fumes and noise that you're talking about, that's challenging for any residential, and the OCP vision is commercial ground floor, residential above kind of thing for that area. So, and obviously the building code is not going to let residential more than one unit there with that use going on. But if it's not going to be a vet clinic, what kind of use could reasonably be compatible there, given the nature of the adjacent business? Well, obviously you think another industrial business, but that's actually not compatible with the zoning of the downtown. In an ideal world, there'd be some way to find enough financial incentive for the automotive business to relocate into our industrial area and make a profit doing it. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's the kind of thing that would be an ideal solution. So we're going to be looking for a compromise, and I don't know what it's going to be in the end. I look forward to what staff and the architect and APC can pull together, but I would like to see it go to APC and see what they can do, and try to make it a compromise that works for everyone. Thank you. Any second speakers? Would someone like, oh, we've got a motion. So we've had our discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So that's being referred to APC. This recommendation goes to the next council meeting. They'll likely confirm it, and then it'll go off to APC, and depending what happens from there, it'll go back to council and potentially advertise the variance. Okay, so we will now move on to our next item, which is 7B. This is Development Variance Application number DV 100321. This is 9844 3rd Street, which is the Cameo. And we've got a presentation by the applicant. Go ahead.
This is already read, so I think it's ready.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm Margie Shenduk, Director of Operations for the Casman Group, Casman Properties, and in this case, Sydney Ave Ventures. So I'm here tonight. Thank you, Mayor and Council and staff, for entertaining us. So I'm here tonight to, in regards to the signage for the Cameo residential portion of the building. My understanding is it's not typical to have a sign, like a proper sign for a residential building. What I would say is our building isn't typical. And so we're asking today for a variance to allow us to use a sign that was purchased for this purpose for the Cameo residential portion of the building. So I have a few slides to further illustrate. Next slide, please. Oh, wow.
power might be, not be turned on.
There's only literally 4 slides, so. All right, so we have a great rendering here, but really you could actually just step outside the door and look across the street to see exactly what you see on the screen here. So as you can see, when we designed the Cameo building back in 2017 and went through APC through those years, we had a challenge, as much as it seems like a unique challenge, to put a residential unit next to an auto body shop. Putting a 5 stories of residential on top of a movie theater has been an exciting and very hard challenge. But during the APC, it became very clear to want to separate the movie theater and everything that goes along with Star Cinema and that community amenity away from the residential portion of the building. So if you click to the next, you can see basically the view of the Cameo building and then the view of Star Cinema. Now, one of the things that was talked about in great discussion during the APC, originally the building wasn't designed with this prominence of signage, but a couple of things that we were given very clear direction on was APC had requested that we redesign so that somebody could come to the movie theater, pull in to a parking scallop, drop off somebody at the movie theater, and nobody get wet. The other one was when you're on Beacon Avenue, to be able to look down and know that that community amenity exists and where the Star Cinema was, and kind of in keeping with the whole idea of really kind of making that community amenity prominent. And if you just click to the next slide, please. So what that leaves us with is a actual front entry for the 45 suites of the building with no sign, and a little bit maybe of future confusion as to where they live when Skip the Dishes and Guests and Amazon and the amount of deliveries that inevitably come to these buildings. And I know a lot of people in Sydney get things delivered, be it groceries, library books. There's a lot of really great delivery services for people with accessibility issues and maybe can't carry their library books or their groceries anymore. So we have a sign that was approved for use for our presentation center, and we purchased that for dual purpose. And we actually have a spot that was always intended. Where we missed was we were so focused on the movie theater sign and getting all that ready during the development permit, we forgot to ask for the sign at that time. And here I am before you asking if I can put up our sign. And if you just click to the next one, it's a sign that you guys might recognize. It was on Beacon Avenue for quite some time. And it's in keeping with the style of the building. And keeping in mind as well that there's also going to be 2 commercial spaces. One's already branded as Deco de Mode, and they're going to be coming for a commercial sign. Another one is a professional space that I can't quite disclose yet who it is, but it's not nearly as exciting as that sounds. But they'll also have signage. So it's really important that, like I said, for the 45 suites of residential units, that it becomes clear which door is actually the door for the building. So that's my presentation. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So, actually, let me start with staff. Were there any comments you wanted to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add that the sign itself does comply with the size requirements for a fascia sign in the sign bylaw. So a fascia sign being a flat sign on a building. What doesn't comply is essentially the content. So the sign bylaw requires that an establishment, which is basically a business, a nonprofit, or a government, be using the sign for advertising, and it doesn't allow for a residential building to advertise itself, the residential portion of the building in this case. Across the street in the multifamily sign district, we do allow that, and given that this is essentially a multifamily building as well with some other uses, staff don't see any issues with buildings like this having their own sort of signage above the lobby or what have you. And there is a recommendation, in fact, in the staff report to bring forward an amendment to the sign bylaw to address this. That is a bit of a longer-term fix, and given that that's staff's position, we support the variance. Thank you.
Thank you. So committee questions for the presenter or staff? Councillor Garnet?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Thank you for your presentation. I note Casman Properties on the sign. So in that apartment or condo portion of the building, will you have an office?
We will not have an office, however, Casman Properties is actually the owner of the Star Cinema, and I would be the acting landlord, and we will have quite a prominence in the building for quite a few years to come as the people who need to take care of the building, warranty the building. We own some units within the building more from a owner side.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Other questions from committee? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. So I understand the rationale for the functionality of letting people identify this is where you enter the residential component and distinguishing that from the theater. The thing that I struggle a bit with, why can't it just say Cameo? And I guess by adding that, by Casman or the developer adds to me, it becomes more like advertising for that company rather than being a functional thing just to identify. So is it mandatory? Is it critical for Casman to be identified?
Well, to show you, the sign exists already. So
Okay.
a different sign would be literally sending this to a landfill and creating a new sign. The sign was created dual purpose. And to be frank with you, we're quite proud of the building. When we got together, we partnered with the town of Sydney. We partnered as Casman Properties with the Star Cinema. We're giving subsidized rent for the Star Cinema. This building isn't a standard building for us. It really isn't. This one is I would say a landmark building for Casman. So are we advertising that we built it? Absolutely, but we're also subsidizing the rent for a community amenity for many years to come, and also working with that. And we want to be known as the people who built that building. We want to make sure people know that we're the ones who are taking care of it as well, and everybody in the building knows kind of who built it and who to go to if they have any concerns with it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from committee? Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I'll turn to staff for a moment. We had an elevation drawing in our council package that shows more clearly the placement of the sign and the adjacent commercial units. Is it possible to have that slide on the screen, please? No, it was actually, it's actually this one in the council package.
Just sydney.ca. If I could suggest, if you go to the development, I think the plans are in there. Under $98.44 third plans. That's the one.
That's the one, thank you. So thank you for providing this in our council package and your presentation this evening. I certainly appreciate the dual purpose nature of the sign that was made. It certainly looked appropriate on Beacon Avenue for the show center that you've had for quite some time. When you expand this a little bit, or we see it in our council package, we actually see that what I believe are the resident right below that sign at street level. there is the word spandrel, which I'm sure is just lettering to indicate that there will be a sign there or an address there. And then there is a commercial unit to the right, to our right, looking at this. And I guess there will be a commercial sign there for the business that's there. And then similarly to the left, for the business that's been announced there, they will have a sign at that level as well. And I want to come back to the functionality. In terms of, I think the letter of rationale was very reasonable in terms of having wayfinding purposes for visitors, guests, and deliveries to see where the Cameo residences are. But it doesn't say Cameo residences, it just says Cameo, which is really the entire building. And there is that opportunity right above the residential doors, which only go to, those doors only take you to the residence, as I understand. I'm not really seeing, in terms of wayfinding, I'm not seeing the word residences, and I am seeing Casman Properties, which has been spoken to already, but I don't see Casman Properties helping with the intended purpose of wayfinding. So any comment in terms of what might be going right above the doors?
Yeah, actually, it's already there. If you look outside, we have a very clear, it must be a bylaw from the fire department as to what has to go right above the door. And so in those areas right now that say spandrel, there's actually extremely large white lettering that mark the actual like mailing address, like the civic address of those units. So right now, that is, it's a large address, and then over to the right, it's the same thing. Now, I would say that the placement of the sign that's gonna go to the right, they are gonna be looking for something that's a little bit more branded for their area, for their commercial area, and same with to the left. It wouldn't just be a graphic. I'm sure they're gonna want, I mean, that's part of their business. They'll be requesting that for a sign permit, but the right above the doors there, that space is already basically taken with very large lettering.
Okay, fair enough. I just, again, the comment, I mean, the other concern I have is that I would be very supportive of an amendment to our sign bylaw permitting the name of buildings in the commercial downtown. We see it in the residential areas all the time. We know of buildings in the downtown, whether they be Oceana or the Meridian or the Harrow or the and that sort of thing, and people use that to the cannery, to the Pier residences, to get around town. So I'm very supportive of that, but I'm not necessarily willing to be supportive of seeing the developer for each of those buildings downtown having their logo on those buildings, or having that permitted within the sign bylaw. So yeah, I'll listen to colleagues and any comments you might have further. I mean, there's been a substantial investment in this building to all purposes, and while I understand a dual purpose sign, it was a good intention. I think what's really important is what is the best for wayfinding and going forward for this building.
So I'd like to just step in as chair. We're supposed to be having questions for the proponent or staff, not a debate with them about the merits of one thing or another. I saw staff had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add a bit of additional information from the sign bylaw. The sign bylaw does restrict for multifamily buildings, I'm quoting, only the name and address of the building complex shall be displayed on a sign.
Thank you, Chair. For part of my comments were to see if the proponent had a comment on those, but I appreciate that this is not the time to be motivating one way or the other. Sir, I have another question, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Councillor O'Keefe, you had a question with regards to staff's comments?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, I didn't catch it all, if you could repeat that again, in regards to what the bylaw says on signage for multifamily buildings.
So in sign district B, which is multifamily, there's two requirements. The first is that only the name and address of the building complex shall be displayed on a sign. The second is that the display area of a sign shall not exceed 10.8 square feet. So 2 by 5 approximately.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. Are there any additional questions for staff or the proponent? Councillor Rentu?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking then at recommendations and through to staff, what are the implications from staff's perspective if the second recommendation were to be moved? Is there an option to table, or how would the variance permit application be addressed if council chose to explore amending the sign bylaw first prior to addressing this?
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, it's really a timing issue, so turning around the sign bylaw amendment, I can't give you a time frame on that at this point. It's really the variance as a mechanism to speed up the approval of whatever sign council deems acceptable in this case, rather than having to wait. I don't know how long for the bylaw to be amended.
Thank you.
So-
And then if I may, through to the applicant, with respect to that particular comment, because it sounds like the concern may well be around the potential commercial assumptions that, that may come with the sign and the language that's there. How urgent is it in your eyes to have a sign up, or are you content to have town go through this process of revising the bylaw and then revisiting signage at that point?
Well, I would say that I have an electrician there today, and we're about to have our opening, and it'd be nice to set it off in a completed fashion. If we don't get this sign approved, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think we would just even explore putting a sign on the building, as much as that would be a detriment to the people. We paid for this one for this purpose. I guess that was preemptive, to not get it approved ahead of time. Like I said, the focus was, at the time of permitting, was the Star Cinema was a large concern. It's figuring out how that would play out with the town. I don't really know. I didn't actually think that this would be problematic based on our commitment to the community and what we've done for the theater and what we've done in the theater expenses and the temporary theater and all this stuff. I thought that this was almost fairly straightforward based on where it is in the community and how good of business partners we've been up until this point, even in our construction site and everything like that. This is a bit of a surprise to me.
Thank you. So I guess I'm understanding from committee that there is general support for the idea of a sign identifying the residential component of the building, but there's concern about the Casman name on it. I think so through, or actually to staff, the recommendation that is here is with respect to advertising the variance. If council wanted to impose a condition that it just be the name of the residence per the kind of wording that's in the sign bylaw for the multifamily area, how would that be done? Like, could you suggest a motion of that nature? Or would it be a question of essentially council deciding that they're not going to approve the variance that's forward and being put forward, and request that the proponent amend the application? So I guess the question, can council or committee impose a condition, or would it be necessary to ask the proponent to amend the application?
And if I may, Chair, the recommendation that's here, I feel is fairly clear, but I certainly want to hear staff's comment on that, where it reads, to allow fascia sign displaying the building name. So it's quite specific about what the sign can entail, and which is, somewhat contrary to the example of the current existing sign that's in place. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
I guess I appreciate the wording of the motion, but the application in front of us is the application that's in front of us.
I suppose a clause could be added to the start of this recommendation, saying something like, provided that the proposed signage include only the building name, followed by council be, or staff be directed to advertise, or whatever the wording is there. Placing that as sort of a precursor to, once that's complete, and staff have that drawing in hand, then the advertising could take place, and we could come back to the next council meeting, and potentially it could be approved at that meeting. If the applicant is not interested in doing that, obviously we'd never get a drawing, and the application would essentially end there.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we need to have a perfect motion tonight, because it's a recommendation going to council, and council staff would have the opportunity to provide better advice on the wording before it actually hits council. It's more a question of what's the committee's desire. Does the majority, is the majority receptive to the idea of advertising for variance for a sign with the name of the Cameo building on it, Cameo Residences, or are we okay with Casman being on it? So I think that's the debate that the committee really needs to wrestle with. I will make some comments. I'm sure that if the application was made to the previous council at the time the development was proposed, that it would have been approved. With respect to the contributions to the amenity, the Star Cinema, all that kind of thing, there was a deal made for the development involving variances and other things. So there was a deal made, and that involved the Star Cinema and the various things that Casman is doing. And definitely those things are a benefit to the community, but that was a deal bought and paid for at the time. There's no additional value to be put on the table from my point of view. At any rate, committee, we need to provide some direction on what's going to happen with this variance. So would someone, sorry, Councilor Garnett?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just want to weigh in here. I'm fine with the recommendation too, and I know what you're speaking to. Having walked around the entire neighborhood, and a person who's been a delivery agent for over 31 years, the most common thing is to frost the name of the building. And there is room above where the number is. That could be done. And I would prefer that in terms of consistency with all the other buildings than having a fascia. And as far as delivery personnel look for addresses. They don't care about the name of a building. We all know the names of the building, but it's all about the address. So that's the key thing. But I would like for consistency, given that every other building pretty much has frosting above in the glass, the name of the building. And I don't support having the Casman properties on there, because I feel like that's free advertising, whether it is or not. I don't agree with it. So that's where I stand on the issue, and I'm not sure if anybody wants to weigh in. Thank you.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you, yeah. I do have a concern with the name of the property developer being included in the name, and while I appreciate the concern for landfill, I think given the construction matters and the amount of material that went into landfill, saving this sign, although I don't want to suggest that we shouldn't start looking at saving and making use of things, that's the least of the issues. But I think to put the name of the developer on the building with the name is not appropriate. It goes against our bylaws, and I think it also would set set a precedent that really we don't want to start having. And as Councillor Garnett said, this is about wayfinding, and others have talked about wayfinding. It is about the address. The Cameo Theatre is on 3rd Street, and the residence is on Sydney Avenue. So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of confusion regarding that, but I certainly won't support approval of the signage the way it is. And as my colleague just mentioned, you know, all the other residential buildings have the name on the doors or on the glass someplace. And I think that it's a lovely building, and I'm pleased to have it in the town and all the rest of it, but I don't agree with the signage. Thank you.
So, we should really make a motion so that we're getting somewhere. So Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I guess a question back to the applicant, if I may.
Sure.
And I guess one of the things I'm struggling with in terms of the motion is, you know, we could, as I think as Councillor Rentoul mentioned, the motion as it is, I think, is generic enough. It just says building name. So to me, that doesn't mean including the development. However, I guess there's kind of no point. My question to the applicant is, if the name is not, if we're not going to allow the sign as it is, it says Casman on it, is there any point to us, you know, moving forward with this variance and going out for public input if your intention isn't, if your intention would be, okay, we just won't bother then?
I already bought a sign once. If I'm not allowed to use it, I won't buy a second sign.
Okay, so if we, so basically what you're saying is if we don't allow this sign, there's not gonna be another sign anyhow.
You are correct.
Okay, so we're just better off to reject the variance then? Okay,
Very disappointingly.
okay,
So-
so we,
Please, it's not intended to be a debate at this point
Yeah,
with
okay.
committee.
But I'm
So,
just trying to
you've
clarify.
answered the question. That should be the end of it. Thank you.
okay,
Okay? Now, would someone like to make a motion?
okay.
Go ahead.
I'll move that, the development variance permit application number DV 100100321 to allow a fascia sign displaying the business name and that, be rejected.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded that the application be denied. Rejected, denied, same thing.
Yeah, and so my for the reasons that we've talked about, that, I don't think most of us are in agreement with having Casman on there. But I still see that we could still, if we wanted to, still have staff bring forward a sign bylaw, option number 2, if we chose to allow for just an ordinary sign.
That'll
That's-
be a follow-up motion.
Yeah, okay.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion on the floor? Councillor Rentoul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And so, I guess reluctantly, I'm inclined to support the motion that's before us, and I say that in all due respect to Casman and the work that you've done on the development. I think the concern is likely that the precedent that it sets, as was mentioned by a colleague, and I think the opportunity for council to have revisited the sign bylaw and perhaps provided some more latitude there, and still may in the future when that bylaw is addressed, may be the avenue that makes the most sense long-term for the town to address this. So I'll yield to further comments from my colleagues. Thank you.
Anything further? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried then. Would anyone like to make a motion with respect to the sign bylaw?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'll move that staff bring forward an amendment to the sign bylaw that would allow residential building naming in Sign District C Downtown Commercial.
And is
Second.
it seconded? Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And that completes our business for tonight. So a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. We're adjourned.